We prepared for war. Not openly, not foolishly. The Galactic Council has endured for 12,000 standard cycles because we anticipate catastrophe before it arrives. And humanity, volatile, inventive, statistically prone to violence, was catastrophe given form. The chamber was fortified beyond ceremony. Armored sentinels lined the obsidian walls, their plasma halberds emitting a low, harmonic hum that vibrated through the marrow of lesser species. Defense drones hovered in concentric patterns above the central dais, projecting overlapping shield matrices calibrated to withstand orbital bombardment. Even the atmosphere had been subtly adjusted, oxygen ratios lowered to diminish combustion potential. We told ourselves it was procedural, but every species present had studied Terra's history. We knew what humans did when cornered. When the Terran diplomatic envoy demanded full attendance for their inaugural address, no one declined. Curiosity is powerful. Fear is stronger. The doors opened. The sound echoed, slow, deliberate, final. And they entered without visible weapons. No power signatures flared across our tactical displays, no concealed alloy readings, no micro-singularity cores. Our orbital arrays confirmed the absence of escort fleets within immediate strike range. The humans had come with a single transport vessel, civilian class by registry. 6 figures stepped into the chamber in dark ceremonial attire. Their garments were unadorned, matte black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. They walked in absolute formation, strides synchronized not by machine assistance but by instinct. Their posture was not defensive. It was not submissive. It was something worse. Confident. My secondary eyelids flickered in reflex as the chamber's defensive grid recalibrated. Once. Twice. 3 times. The system could not categorize them. Civilian parameters rejected. Military classification inconclusive. Threat detection AIs flagged the delegation as unknown variable. That designation rippled through the chamber like a silent scream. Across 37 species, subtle panic responses activated. Venom sacs tightened, thermal plumes spiked, neural crests flared in agitation. Several ambassadors triggered private evacuation protocols beneath their podiums. The humans did not react. They advanced with measured calm toward the central platform. I remember their eyes. That is what unsettled me most. They did not scan the chamber nervously, as inexperienced diplomats often do when surrounded by superior firepower. They did not avoid the weapons trained discreetly upon them. They assessed. Exits, sightlines, elevation advantages, structural load-bearing arches. Their gazes flicked upward once, briefly toward the shield drone cluster, then forward again. Professional. One of our security tacticians transmitted a quiet query to the grid. Are they armed internally? The answer returned negative. No implants, no subdermal plating.
No energy cores embedded beneath flesh. They were, by all measurable metrics, unarmed. Yet the unease deepened. Because humans, we had learned, do not require conventional weapons to be dangerous. Their species evolved on a death world of unstable climate and predatory fauna. They mastered combustion before mastering unity. They split atoms before eliminating internal conflict. They built devices capable of ending themselves, and then chose, repeatedly, not to. That paradox alone made them unpredictable. The 6 Terrans reached the envoy platform. 4 positioned themselves behind the central speaker. 2 remained slightly offset, granting unobstructed lines of sight across the chamber floor. Hands clasped behind their backs, feet shoulder-width apart, balanced. A subtle detail caught my attention. Their footwear contained magnetized soles, calibrated to adapt to fluctuating gravity fields. Their jackets, though ceremonial, shifted microscopically under sensor sweep, woven with reactive fibers capable of dispersing kinetic impact. Defensive, entirely defensive. But defense, when perfected, becomes its own form of dominance. The chamber quieted. Not the performative quiet of political decorum, the absolute quiet of predators recognizing another predator. I felt it then, the slow crystallization of realization. If they had come to fight, nothing inside this chamber would stop them. Not because they possessed superior firepower. We outmatched them in fleet tonnage, in plasma yield, in antimatter reserves. but because they were prepared to escalate beyond calculation. Humans do not freeze when confronted by overwhelming force. They adapt, they improvise, they endure. Our simulations had shown it repeatedly. In asymmetric engagements, humans performed unpredictably high. Remove their weapons, and they weaponized environment. Remove environment, and they weaponized biology. Remove advantage, and they created it. The envoy stepped forward. She was smaller than I anticipated, fragile by certain anatomical standards, no visible armor, no ceremonial blade, only presence. She placed both hands on the podium as though it belonged to her. Our speaker adjusted his vocal harmonizer, preparing formal introduction. Before he could begin, the human guard shifted, barely perceptible, a synchronized redistribution of weight. The motion was minimal, the implication was vast. They had mapped response trajectories already. If violence erupted, they would not shield themselves first, they would shield her. My species has a word for that kind of devotion. It translates loosely to irrational loyalty. Humans call it something else. Duty. A data stream flickered across my retinal display. Several council members had discreetly ordered weapon capacitors to full charge. Others initiated silent distress signals to their home fleets. The humans' expressions did not change. One of them, positioned to the envoy's right, allowed his gaze to sweep across us once more.
And for a fraction of a second, our eyes met. There was no hostility there, no arrogance, only calculation, and something beneath it, resolve. It struck me with unsettling clarity. They were not here to intimidate. They were here to prove something. The envoy inhaled. The chamber's atmospheric regulators hummed. Thousands of years of interstellar politics held its breath. And in that suspended moment, I understood the true source of our fear. It was not that humans carried hidden weapons. It was that they did not need to. The silence expanded, pressing against the walls like deep ocean pressure. If they chose violence, we would respond in kind. If we chose violence, they would survive it. And if they survived, I realized, with a chill that ran through every nerve filament of my being, this meeting would determine whether humanity became our greatest ally or the last mistake the Galactic Council ever made. We did not fear humanity because of what they were. We feared them because of what they had survived. Before extending even provisional observer status, the Council enacted Protocol of Ascendant Evaluation, a comprehensive excavation of a species' military, sociological, and psychological history. Most emerging civilizations reveal predictable trajectories: resource wars, territorial consolidation, eventual stabilization. Humanity did not follow predictable trajectories. We began with their earliest recorded conflicts, tribal disputes over arable land and water. Primitive, brutal, expected. But as their technology advanced, so too did the scale of their violence. Bladed weapons gave way to projectile arms. Projectile arms gave way to mechanized warfare. Mechanization escalated into industrialized annihilation. They waged global wars, not once, twice, within a single century. Entire continents were scarred. Tens of millions perished. Their atmosphere itself bore chemical wounds from their ambition. By every council projection model, such devastation should have collapsed their civilization permanently. It did not. They rebuilt, faster than probability allowed. And then came the most troubling discovery. Their wars were not always fought for survival. They fought for ideology, for political abstraction, for pride, for resources measured in lines on maps invisible from orbit. Some of their conflicts began with assassinations, trade disputes, even misinformation spirals amplified by their primitive communication networks. Causes so fragile, they would not have triggered a skirmish among most council species. Yet when true extinction-level threats emerged, the pattern shifted. An asteroid impact capable of global devastation. Their response: planetary detection grids and deflection systems within decades. A viral pandemic crossing borders faster than policy could contain it. Their response: genome sequencing at unprecedented speed. Collaborative vaccine development across rival nations.
Nuclear brinkmanship, devices capable of rendering their biosphere uninhabitable. For decades, they stood at the precipice of self-destruction, and they stepped back, repeatedly. This duality fractured our predictive algorithms. Humanity could destroy itself over ideology, yet when annihilation loomed indiscriminately, they unified with startling efficiency. Resilience paired with creativity. That combination is rare. It is dangerous. Our analysts simulated multiple invasion scenarios during humanity's pre-FTL era. The results were unsatisfactory. Even when technologically inferior, humans demonstrated asymmetric adaptation. They weaponized terrain, weather, infrastructure, information. When their planet experienced glacial extremes in ancient eras, they did not migrate toward extinction. They learned to harness fire, to build insulated structures, to cultivate crops in hostile climates. When industrialization overheated their biosphere, they argued, fiercely, but eventually engineered mitigation technologies, renewable energy grids, atmospheric research coalitions. When oceans rose, they built barriers. When deserts expanded, they irrigated. When food shortages threatened collapse, they genetically modified crops. The pattern repeated across millennia. Problem? Adaptation. Survival. Our oldest member species, who once nearly succumbed to stellar radiation storms, reviewed the Terran archives in silence. But it was not their military history alone that unsettled us. On most council worlds, civilian populations are intentionally demilitarized. Combat roles are specialized. Defense is institutional. The separation between soldier and non-combatant is culturally rigid. On Terra, that boundary blurred. Civilians trained in emergency response from youth. Disaster drills were commonplace. Many possessed basic defensive instruction. In several of their nation-states, private ownership of weaponry was legally protected for centuries. Even where formal armament was restricted, improvisation thrived. Human historical records are filled with instances of ordinary individuals altering the course of conflict, engineers repurposing factories for wartime production, farmers forming resistance networks, scientists breaking encryption codes that shifted global balances of power. One particular archive unsettled our strategic council. During a planetary-scale war, human civilians repurposed civilian vessels into combat-ready platforms within weeks. Commercial industries transformed into military supply chains almost overnight. Their society could pivot rapidly. To underestimate humanity once was a strategic error. To underestimate them twice was extinction. We studied their psychological profiles as well. Humans exhibit a trait our xenopsychologists labeled stubborn hope. Even in catastrophic scenarios, bombed cities, collapsing economies, pandemics, cultural artifacts consistently emphasized perseverance. Stories, songs, visual media celebrating survival against overwhelming odds. Their entertainment frequently depicted apocalyptic survival scenarios, alien invasions, global disasters. Instead of paralyzing fear, such narratives seemed to inoculate them psychologically. They rehearsed survival through fiction. Who does that? Our war simulations began incorporating civilian participation models. Survival rates increased, resistance duration multiplied. Even when deprived of centralized command structures, decentralized human groups continued coordinated opposition. They were not hive-minded, but they communicated rapidly, adapted locally, and shared innovations globally. When the Council's predictive AI ran a long-term projection, if humanity achieved parity with our technology, the outcome distribution fractured dramatically. In cooperative scenarios, they became stabilizing allies. In adversarial ones, they became relentless insurgents capable of prolonged multi-system resistance. Not dominant, but enduring. And enduring across sufficient time becomes dominance. So when their delegation requested entry into the council chamber without visible weapons, our analysts did not interpret it as naivete. They recalculated. Perhaps this was not restraint. Perhaps it was signaling. A species confident enough in its capacity for escalation does not need to display it. There was one final data point that lingered in my cognition. Throughout their history, humanity's greatest advancements often followed catastrophe. War accelerated medical breakthroughs. Space exploration intensified during geopolitical rivalry. Global crises catalyzed unprecedented cooperation. Pressure refined them. What would interstellar pressure do? The thought unsettled me as I observed the Terran guards standing motionless behind their envoy. Unarmed, but born from a species that had weaponized adversity itself. If threatened, would they fracture as they once had on Terra? Or would they unify against us? The council chamber felt smaller in that moment.
Because the true weapon humanity carried into our midst was not concealed beneath fabric or skin. It was encoded in their history. Adapt, endure, overcome. And as our analysts finalized their assessment, a quiet conclusion spread through the strategic network like a whispered warning. If humanity ever decided the galaxy was hostile, they would not surrender. They would learn. And that possibility changed everything. The most dangerous moment in the chamber was not when the human envoy began to speak. It was when her guards stopped moving. They took position behind the envoy platform with mechanical precision, though no machinery guided them. Hands clasped loosely behind their backs, feet aligned to equal distribution, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward, breath steady. The absence of visible weaponry should have been comforting. It was not. Our security grid intensified passive scans.
Thermal imaging revealed subtle micro-fluctuations along their musculature, fibers primed, not tense, but ready. Their heart rates were elevated only slightly above resting baseline, not fear, controlled readiness. Their footwear registered as magnetized, adaptive grip soles calibrated for unstable gravity conditions. Their garments, ceremonial black, were woven with reactive nanofibers capable of dispersing kinetic impact and limited plasma exposure. Nothing overtly offensive, entirely defensive. And yet every tactical instinct I possessed screamed that we were not the ones in control. A data stream scrolled across my internal display, posture analytics, predictive modeling. The guard stance angles created overlapping fields of protection around the envoy. They had chosen positions that granted clear lines of sight not only to entrances, but to structural support pillars, ventilation shafts, shield drone arrays, and most concerning, the council speaker's dais. One guard adjusted his stance by half a degree. Half. A minor redistribution of weight, imperceptible to the untrained eye. But that half degree aligned him perfectly with the speaker's platform. Not threatening. Prepared. My secondary processors calculated possible engagement timelines. 8 seconds, 2 seconds, 6 seconds. They had mapped us, before we finished mapping them. A murmur traveled across private council channels. Several species initiated silent evacuation protocols, personal teleport anchors primed, emergency corridors unlocked, defensive fields calibrated for rapid deployment. This had never occurred during a diplomatic assembly, not even during the Korthax dispute, when two member civilizations nearly declared open war within the chamber itself. But this was different. The Korthax had brandished weapons openly. Their aggression was loud, measurable. The humans were quiet. Stillness among predator species is not absence of threat. It is coiled intent. The phrase originated from a human martial discipline thousands of years old. The implication was clear. Remove the blade, and the body becomes the blade. Remove the weapon, and the environment becomes the weapon. Remove fear, and what remains? I focused again on the guard who had shifted half a degree. His gaze was steady, unfocused in the way of someone tracking multiple variables simultaneously. He was not staring at the speaker. He was calculating trajectories. If violence erupted, he would move not toward the threat, but towards its consequence, toward the protection of the envoy. Our combat AIs attempted predictive simulation based solely on posture and musculature. Probability of neutralizing a single guard within 2 seconds using concentrated plasma fire, 78%. Probability of neutralizing all 4 before any reached the envoy, 12%. Probability that collateral damage to council members would exceed acceptable thresholds, 64%. The numbers did not comfort me.
Because they did not factor in what humans historically excelled at: improvisation. I replayed archived footage from their planetary conflicts: soldiers disarming opponents with empty hands, civilians constructing barricades from furniture and debris, rescue workers navigating collapsing structures with nothing but training and will. Humans do not freeze under pressure. They compress. Then they act. The envoy had not yet spoken, and already the chamber's emotional temperature had shifted from suspicion to something sharper. Respect edged with fear. I sensed it in the pheromonal fluctuations of the Varelian delegate, in the subtle chromatic shift of the Salathi ambassador's crest, in the minute tremor of the council speaker's secondary limb as he adjusted his notes. The humans did not fidget. They did not whisper. They did not perform dominance displays. They existed in readiness. And readiness, displayed without aggression, is profoundly destabilizing, because it denies your opponent justification. If they had entered armed, we could have condemned them. If they had entered submissive, we could have dismissed them. Instead, they entered prepared.
One of the shield drones drifted imperceptibly closer to the envoy platform, recalibrating its defensive envelope. The human guard near it shifted his gaze upward for a fraction of a second. Acknowledgement, not alarm. He had already accounted for it. A thought occurred to me then, unsettling in its simplicity. What if the humans had not come to demonstrate vulnerability? What if they had come to demonstrate confidence? Across Council history, power has always been displayed overtly. Warships in orbit, armed escorts, visible deterrence. Humanity had chosen a different strategy. They showed us nothing. And in that nothingness, we projected everything we feared. Our predictive AIs began generating worst-case scenarios independent of visible triggers. Internal sabotage, structural collapse, close-quarters engagement within shield null zones. The projections spiraled, because the variables were human. And humans do not adhere strictly to variables. For the first time in recorded Council history, I detected overlapping evacuation signals from 3 separate member species simultaneously. Silent, discreet, prepared to abandon the chamber at the first sign of escalation. Yet the humans gave no such sign. They stood, unarmed, unafraid. And that absence of fear was the most destabilizing element of all. Fear is a universal constant in interspecies diplomacy. It maintains balance. It enforces caution. Humans, it seemed, were operating without it. Or perhaps they possessed it and mastered it. There is a difference. A foolish species does not feel fear because it does not comprehend danger. A disciplined species feels fear and proceeds anyway. I studied their breathing patterns again. Controlled, intentional. Not the shallow rhythm of bravado, not the erratic cadence of panic. Measured, trained.
If conflict erupted, they would not scatter. They would move with purpose. And I realized something else, something colder. They had not scanned the chamber for potential threats alone. They had scanned for weaknesses. Structural seams, ventilation intakes, power conduits beneath the flooring. Not to exploit preemptively, but to understand the battlefield should one be forced upon them. They were not posturing. They were not escalating. They were signaling. A message far more terrifying than aggression. We are capable. We are prepared. We choose not to act. Choice implies power. Restraint implies confidence. The Council had expected a species eager to prove itself. Instead, we faced a species that did not need to. My gaze returned to the guard aligned with the speaker's dais. For an instant, so brief it may have been imagination, his eyes shifted, scanning the upper balcony where automated defense turrets lay concealed behind ornamental plating. He knew. He knew where they were. He knew their firing arcs. He knew their delay thresholds. Our secrecy had lasted precisely 11 seconds under human observation. A tremor moved through my neural frill. Because, if they had mapped our defenses in moments, how long would it take them to map our vulnerabilities across the galaxy? The envoy finally inhaled to speak. The chamber tightened around the sound. And in that breath, suspended between peace and catastrophe, one truth crystallized within me. These humans did not fear us. And if they did not fear us, then either they were catastrophically naive, or they understood something about power, about survival, that the rest of us had yet to learn. The silence deepened. And for the first time since humanity achieved faster-than-light travel, the Galactic Council felt uncertain. The first time the Galactic Council truly recalculated humanity was not inside our chamber. It was at Kethra Prime. 3 cycles before their diplomatic address, a multi-species refugee convoy emerged from the fractured trade lanes near the Kethra Drift. The region was unstable, politically fragmented, economically desperate, rich in isolated targets. And predators thrive in isolation. The pirate fleet that intercepted the convoy was well known to us. They called themselves the Vrax Coalition. We called them slavers, harvesters of biological components. They did not negotiate. They extracted. Standard protocol for civilian vessels encountering the Vrax was immediate retreat and distress transmission. Survival probability increased by 17% when ships scattered at maximum burn. The convoy attempted compliance with protocol. One vessel did not. A Terran transport ship, registry civilian, cargo classification humanitarian, altered course, unarmed. No visible escort.
no military transponder codes. Sensor logs from the incident were later submitted to Council in full transparency by the humans themselves. I have reviewed them repeatedly.
The Terran vessel repositioned, deliberately, between the pirate interceptors and the densest cluster of refugee ships. No weapon systems powered, no targeting arrays activated. Instead, a narrow-band transmission broadcast across open frequencies. 4 words. Stand by. No elaboration. No threat. The pirate response was immediate. Boarding pods launched within seconds, magnetically latching on to the Terran hull. Plasma cutters ignited, breaching entry points along 3 decks simultaneously. The refugee convoy scattered. The human ship remained. Internal footage, recorded by corridor security systems, was included in the data packet the Terrans provided us. It is one thing to hear of human resilience. It is another to witness it. When the first breach point ruptured, the pirates advanced expecting chaos. They found structure. The corridor lights dimmed instantly, not due to damage, but command override. Emergency bulkheads sealed behind the boarding parties, isolating them from retreat paths. Atmospheric composition shifted subtly, reducing oxygen density to levels uncomfortable for most known species, but tolerable to humans. Improvised barricades materialized within seconds. Cargo containers overturned, maintenance carts interlocked, fire suppression foam deployed as both obscurant and traction hazard. The humans did not charge recklessly. They repositioned. Coordinated. I slowed the footage to quarter speed. Their movements were efficient. One human redirected a pirate's plasma blade using a reinforced forearm guard, ceremonial attire repurposed as armor. Another utilized a handheld engineering tool, designed for hull calibration, to deliver an incapacitating strike to a nerve cluster along the pirate's thoracic ridge. Non-lethal. Precise. A third human triggered a localized gravity fluctuation within the corridor, an environmental control override, disorienting the boarding party long enough for coordinated takedown. There was shouting. There was pain. There was no panic. The pirates had boarded expecting surrender. They encountered resistance measured to the millimeter. Within 3 minutes, the first boarding squad was neutralized. Within 6, the second. The third attempted retreat toward their docking pod. The Terrans vented the adjacent corridor to vacuum, not lethally, but enough to force immediate incapacitation through pressure shock. Not a single pirate died. Not a single refugee vessel was boarded. The Terran captain maintained open transmission throughout the engagement. No insults. No threats. Only status updates to the convoy. The pirate flagship attempted to reposition for direct hull bombardment. They made themselves the primary target. The pirates hesitated, because destroying the Terran ship at that range risked collateral damage to the refugees, the very assets they sought to capture intact. The humans understood this. They exploited it. Improvisation. Responsibility weaponized as strategy. Reinforcements from a nearby patrol flotilla arrived 12 minutes after the initial distress call. By then, the pirate boarding parties were restrained, disarmed, and secured in containment compartments originally designated for cargo stabilization. The Terran ship sustained hull damage across 3 decks. Casualty report, 0 fatalities. Injuries, moderate. Refugee losses, none. When the Council convened emergency review of the incident, we expected a request for commendation, compensation, formal recognition of bravery. No demand. No political leverage. When questioned why the vessel violated standard retreat protocol, the human captain responded via secure channel. I remember the exact phrasing. The Council pressed for clarification. The pirates were not targeting the Terran vessel specifically. The refugees belonged to multiple species. No formal alliance obligated intervention. The captain's response did not change. No strategic gain, no resource incentive, no territorial claim, only principle. This confounded our economic models. Intervention without benefit is rare among spacefaring civilizations. Risk is calculated against gain. Assets are preserved unless return justifies exposure. Humans, it seemed, calculated differently. They did not measure cost alone. They measured responsibility. Our sociologists analyzed the footage for underlying cultural drivers. Patterns emerged consistent with their historical archives. Protective instinct extending beyond kinship. Adoption of vulnerable populations into broader moral categories. On Terra, they had intervened in distant conflicts for ideological alignment. They had provided disaster relief to rival nations. They had risked lives to rescue strangers during natural catastrophes. Kethra Prime was not anomaly, it was continuity. The realization spread quietly through the council chambers when the review concluded. If humanity considered you under its protection, it would stand between you and harm, unarmed if necessary, uninvited if required, and it would not ask permission first. That was when fear began transforming into something else, because a species willing to fight without gain is dangerous, but a species willing to fight without gain for others, that is transformative. Back in the council chamber, as the Terran guards stood motionless behind their envoy, I replayed the Kethra footage in my memory. The dim corridor, the improvised barricades, the calm voice over open comms. The same composure radiated from the guards now. Not aggression, protection. If violence erupted here, inside this chamber, who would they shield? Only their envoy? Or anyone within reach? The pirates at Kethra Prime had underestimated an unarmed civilian vessel. The Galactic Council was in danger of making the same error, because humanity's strength was not merely in its capacity to endure attack, it was in its refusal to abandon the vulnerable.
And as the envoy prepared to speak, her guards unwavering behind her, I understood something that unsettled me more than any display of force. If the galaxy ever faced a threat greater than pirates, humanity would not retreat. It would stand in front and dare the darkness to try. The Terran envoy's presence had already unsettled the chamber. 6 feet tall, yet unremarkable in appearance, she projected neither dominance nor deference. Yet when she began to speak, every sensor, every neural implant, every observation drone recorded something impossible to quantify: authority without force. Her voice resonated evenly across the hall, amplified subtly by the chamber's acoustic arrays. Not loud, not strained, clear, measured, unflinching. "We did not bring weapons because this is a place of dialogue," she began. Each syllable struck like a calm heartbeat against the tension in the air. The gravity stabilizers thrummed softly, adjusting to maintain equilibrium as ambient tension intensified. Eyes of delegates widened, not from anger, not from surprise, but from the dawning realization that this species did not operate under the same rules. She did not pause to let them digest fear. She did not embellish, nor did she posture. She recounted humanity's history, its darkest chapters, as archives later confirmed. World wars that spanned continents and ideologies, near-extinction crises from pandemics and nuclear brinkmanship, internal conflicts that could have splintered their civilization. And yet, in every instance, humanity survived. Not through domination, not through conquest, not by annihilating their adversaries, but through cooperation, adaptation, and resilience. "We are not here to dominate," she said, voice calm but firm. The chamber absorbed her words like a body absorbing light. Every species recalculated probabilities, not for immediate aggression, but for the implications of endurance, for the subtle, terrifying power of guardianship. Then the revelation unfolded. Sensor feeds confirmed what had been suspected but never verified. Human fleets were not massed for conquest. Their ships were dispersed across border systems, quietly reinforcing vulnerable colonies, establishing early warning grids, and coordinating defensive protocols. Every action was precise, deliberate, preventative. They had not requested recognition. They had not issued demands. They had simply acted. For the first time, the silence of the chamber was not driven by fear alone. It was driven by recalibration, by the recognition that the human's measure of power was not domination, but guardianship. And guardians, we realized collectively, are far harder to intimidate, far harder to predict, far harder to ignore. Eyes shifted, pheromones adjusted. Subtle gravimetric changes reflected the weight of a lesson the Council had yet to learn fully. Strength unclaimed is still strength. Protection given freely is still power.
As the envoy's words echoed and the last syllable dissipated into the hall, one undeniable truth settled over every delegate present. Humanity's presence was no threat in the conventional sense, but it was a force the galaxy had yet to reckon with. We had expected aggression. We encountered guardianship. And the stars, it seemed, were about to change their alignment. The chamber waited. Every species present held its sensors, its attention, its patience, poised for ritualized delay. The Council's procedure demanded unanimity for full membership and shared defense status.
Normally, such votes required cycles of negotiation, hours, days, sometimes longer. Strategic arguments, veiled threats, and procedural obfuscation were standard. But this time, it did not. The voting interface lit above the central dais. Signals transmitted. Affirmative. 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 Hostile species, those who had argued most vigorously against Terra's inclusion, who had built contingency plans to counter human expansion, cast their votes with unprecedented speed. Several withdrew countermeasures discreetly, recalibrating orbiting defense grids and disengaging automated interdiction protocols. Economic blocs adjusted trade corridors, rerouting vital supplies and recalculating risk exposure. It was swift, surprising, uncharacteristic. I scanned the room with every sensor available. The pheromonal and chromatic shifts reflected a subtle but profound recognition. This was not mere political convenience. Something deeper had changed. We no longer viewed humanity as a volatile newcomer. We saw a civilization tempered by millennia of self-inflicted crises and recovery, a species that had survived its own near extinction and emerged not bitter, not vindictive, but determined. Determined not only to endure, but to ensure that others might endure alongside it. The final tally illuminated above the chamber floor. Unanimous. The room exhaled collectively, though the sigh was imperceptible. Delegates slumped into chairs, adjusted exoskeletal posture, or blinked in disbelief. Procedural formalities continued, but the outcome had already shifted the galaxy's psychological landscape. Behind the envoy, the Terran guards, until now statues of discipline, relaxed slightly. Their stance softened, their grip on ceremonial posture loosened. And then, almost imperceptibly, they smiled. Not triumph, not arrogance, not the smugness of a victor. Relief, as if for cycles they had hoped, truly hoped, that we would choose cooperation, that we would recognize guardianship, not fear, that we would meet their principle with principle. It was then I realized the truth that unsettled me more than any battlefield statistic, any strategic calculation, any weapon array humanity could wield. It was not their strength that terrified us. It was their restraint, the kind of restraint that does not need applause, that does not demand recognition.
That does not hesitate when moral responsibility outweighs personal gain. The chamber's energy shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet profoundly. A force once considered volatile, unpredictable, and dangerous had now been recalibrated, not as a threat, but as a guardian. And as the humans straightened, their eyes scanning the room with quiet certainty, it became clear. The galaxy had met a civilization capable of altering not just outcomes, but the very calculus of morality, cooperation, and survival. We had not faced their fleet, we had not seen their weapons, yet humanity had already won. Not through aggression, but through the quiet demonstration of what it truly meant to stand.